There's an impression that those who've been able to work from home during the pandemic kind of had it made. They were able to stay out of the danger zone while not seeing an interruption in their work and maybe their income. And while it was for many, if you had a business that was dependent on the outside world as well, working from home was just as impacted by the interruptions. If your relief valve is all about creating a social network that exists to bring people together at a time when the greater good involved keeping people apart, the challenges to your livelihood are just as bad as being told one day to go home and figure it out. My guest today spends a lot of her time helping bring those people together in search of networking and finding jobs. And I personally thank my lucky stars that they're out there and keeping up the good fight. We all owe it to them to help get past this pandemic and get on with the new normal. Lani Rosales is the Chief Operating Officer at The American Genius, a strong news voice in the entrepreneur and tech world, offering meaningful, concise insight into emerging technologies, the digital economy, best practices, and a shifting business culture. She's co-authored a book, co-founded BASHH, the Big Ass Social Happy Hour, which is a monthly networking event offline, and Austin Digital Jobs, a group offering a quarterly mix or cramming two venues full of the city's most popular employers and highly qualified, eager talent. She's a seasoned business writer and editorialist with a penchant for the irreverent. My guest today is Lani Rosales. Hi, Lani. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing good. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thanks for asking. My name is Lani. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at theamericangenius.com, which is a national news outlet for entrepreneurs. And we have several offline events, which we'll get to that fun part soon, I'm sure. Co-founded the Austin Digital Jobs Group on Facebook, also the Remote Digital Jobs Group on Facebook. And we have a networking group called Big Ass Social Happy Hour, which is mostly nerds that don't like to network. So great for me.
Thanks. Yeah, me too. I fit right into that. I'm one of those introverted types that if I don't know you, I will sit in the back of the room and never once walk up and say hello. But once I know you, we can do this. So uh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So how did you get started doing all of that kind of work?
That's a great question. I kind of just ended up coming along for the ride. My husband founded a single person blog in 2005. And this is kind of at the early day of blogging when most Americans didn't know what a blog was. It wasn't a known thing yet. And he co owned a real estate brokerage and he wanted to talk about national issues that were going on, but he didn't want to affiliate his name with it. So he just started a nameless blog. And that's where it all started. From there, long story short, he got a cease and desist order from the National Association of Realtors because you can't use the word realtor in a URL. Even if you
Oh,
are a dues paying member, they own the rights to that.
interesting.
Which ironically now they're one of our partners, so we get along with them fine now. But he used that as an opportunity, and he comes from the PR world of Kroger and Apple and big corporate, so he knew how to use that to his advantage and kind of complain about how the big guy was picking on the little guy. So he came out of the closet with who he was and started recruiting a whole bunch of writers. We inevitably transitioned to news, which anyone that doesn't knows there's definitely a difference between blogger's voice and news, and
Yeah.
Google indexes it separately. Then along the way, we kind of launched all these other side things that are now under the same umbrella. But I got into it because I was an English major, and that's when I met my husband was when I was in college. And a lot of English majors end up in marketing, which was kind of my wheelhouse, and that's where I ended up because either that or just go be a professor, which I definitely didn't want to do at all. And the idea is someday to be in like a cabin without internet and just like banging out on a typewriter some novels or something. But for now, doing news and events.
Cool. How does the organization make money?
Great question. So we're ad supported. All the content is always free. Events are always free. Pretty much everything we do is free to consume, and it's always sponsored by different corporations. Offline events has been our largest income over the years. So
Yeah.
this has been
So
a fun time.
it's been a rough year. So
Yeah.
let's get into it. You work from home, so changing that operation didn't matter all that much for you. But
That's right.
a lot of what you do is face to face, in person kind of events, and I'm guessing when the pandemic came along, that all kind of stopped. Now,
Yeah.
tell the audience you're based out of Austin, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Texas is a slightly different world than certainly the world I live in. Right, I'm in Los Angeles, California. You
Sure.
know, so was Texas heavily restrictive, or was it very open? How did things get handled there?
I'm going to answer that question in two ways because the way I personally handled it was quite different. Um, but I would say that initially, Texas was extremely restrictive, and almost some felt like it was an overreaction. But
Okay.
yeah, at first, so yeah, Texas has been one of the first to kind of take the masks off and whatever. But at first, it was very serious, and it didn't really matter what the government said. Businesses took it seriously, so you couldn't
Okay.
go anywhere without a mask, no matter what the government said. And so yeah, so it was a little bit different here, but we were looking at it in December of 2019 and listening to news about it. And a lot of our friends were laughing about it, saying, oh, it's just like, it's a flu or whatever. But my husband is severely immunocompromised. So is my daughter. And so we took it seriously immediately. We saw that it was going to be a problem. We went and bought a deep freezer, filled it full of meat for a year. I mean, we
Yeah.
we took it really seriously, and we didn't go anywhere. My
Okay.
husband still has been very few places because you can visit the doctor over video. You can do most things remotely now.
Right.
I go to the grocery store now. We're starting to open things back up. But yeah, the state at first didn't care, then overreacted. And so it's been kind of this weird pendulum here. But we've just had the policy of if we're not comfortable as an immunocompromised house, we can't ask other people to come out and go to events if we're not willing to go to them either. So,
Right. That's fair. California had a strange so California tried to be, I think as I look back on it, sensitive to local communities making their own decisions by splitting responsibility out into the individual counties. But because of the way California functions, where some of it is very liberal and some of it is very conservative, you got an uneven response to how to deal with
yeah.
the pandemic. And so then the government tried to condense it all down into some kind of cohesive policy. But in the process, we wound up going from very, very restrictive to very, very loose to really, really bad outbreaks
Yeah.
to very restrictive again, right? And um, one of the things I've learned over a year of doing the podcast and talking to people in different places is I think the spirit was right that one size does not fit all. But how do you execute that in a state with 40 million people? It's
I think
hard.
Texas is similar to that, right? All of the major metropolitan areas are very progressive, with Austin being extremely progressive. And so you
Hmm.
have lawmakers in conflict with each other, still in conflict. And so that's been hard. I tend to lean on the, individual responsibility anyways. So, we would have done what we thought was right regardless. But yeah, it's been, I think, similarly, because we have such an uneven population here, where you have these centers that vote one way and then everything else votes the
Yeah.
other, it's hard to have one single policy that everybody can respect statewide. It's tough. Yeah, just like California.
Yep. Um, okay. So you could not have the big events. Did you try to do anything online kind of things to make up for it?
Yes, we invested heavily in a new learning management system, which is how we could deliver new content and have online conferences. And they did okay, but the investment in the time and the creation of those was so high that to be honest, we were lucky to get close to barely even breaking even, and some conferences didn't break even. We ended up in the red. So
Okay.
what I learned from that is that I'm personally, because I oversee the events, I have a skill. I need to figure out what the hell I'm even doing, but I'm apparently okay at doing offline events. Online has been a struggle, and I think for a couple of reasons, not just because of the brand or anything like that, but because everybody switched to online overnight. And so
Yeah.
the volume was so high and the market was already pretty saturated, became way oversaturated. And you had large brands that could do it for everything for free. And
Yeah.
so, and especially in the early days of COVID, a lot of companies were saying, we normally charge for stuff. We're just going to do it for free because it's the right thing to do, which
Right.
is great. But then if you're one of the smaller businesses like ours that are like, please give us money, and everybody's saying it's free, well, you're going to go with the free route no matter the quality. And so, yeah, it was tough. The transition didn't really work out the way I dreamed. Fortunately, the publications has a growing number in readership, and so that's great.
Cool.
So we're set up for success when we kind of reemerge and have the sponsorship dollars, reignited. But yeah, we're still kind of in the rough part, honestly.
Okay. You and I met through the Austin Digital Jobs Board. I'm curious to understand what you saw from before pandemic through today happen in that space. I know I lived it for a long time. I was, unfortunately for me, I was laid off just before the pandemic started at the end of 2019, and it took me 16 months to find something else.
Ouch.
um, which was, yeah, it was brutal. And on the other side of it, which is really interesting, I've got all these different conclusions playing in my head, right? So over the course of a 30-year career, I went from individual contributor to manager to director to senior director, and now I'm a manager again at the end of the 16 months. And there's a part of my head that says that you step back, and then there's a part of my head that says, no, it's not really like that. It's about the job you're doing and where your pay scale lands. But you were running this group that was basically about reaching out for people to help them find jobs during the whole period of time in a market that's very, very high technology right
Yeah.
now. I mean, Austin's probably one of the largest growing tech markets in the country. Tell me about what that was like through the pandemic.
Um, there was just so much suffering because Austin is already a saturated competitive market. And then you throw in infinite hiring freezes because initially no company knew what was coming next. So everything just had to freeze. A lot of it's, to be honest, still pretty frozen. It is opening up, but that was tough to see people that you develop these relationships with over the years struggling that should otherwise not be struggling to find a job, especially senior level people. And so that was tough. But some of the good that came out of it, I think, is the stigma surrounding two things changed. Number one, around remote work. Um, Employers now have a better understanding that their team can work remotely for a lot of roles. And
Yep.
so the stigma around that changed. And I think also the stigma around doing what you have to do to survive has changed. I don't think anyone is ashamed that they might have had to work at a restaurant during COVID or in between jobs now. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's something that at one point would have been hidden, would have been scary to admit, but you know, we all had to do what we had to do to get by this past year, especially unemployed folks, and
Yeah.
taking on Uber gigs and just really whatever it took to put food on the table. So I definitely saw a shift in that. And so to me, that was one of the best positives that has come out of it, is the kind of the shift in the stigma of the hustle in between and not being ashamed of staying alive, doing what
Yeah.
you do.
Yeah. So you say you're seeing a slow transition back to work?
Yeah. So since Austin is a more progressive center, most employers are not forcing anybody back into the office. We are seeing companies now opening offices back up and having it as an option and allowing
Hmm.
people to come back in, which for some, that is a better situation. There are a lot of, let's say, customer support, for example. And we heard from people that said, I, live with four roommates and six dogs, and it is never quiet in here, and it's very difficult. I need to be back in an office. I'm
Yeah.
on the other end of the spectrum where I'm like, I would literally die if I had to go into an office because all of the things that come along with it. And no thanks, I'm not going to do it. But I get that some people don't have the setup for it and never did, never will.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm torn. I obviously my office is my garage, so we don't have a lot of space. Both of the kids are still living at home and working from there, so there's that. I've carved out a space where I can work, but it's not ideal. Um, and I'm just an office dweller type, though I'm fairly confident at this point that my company will never reopen its offices again. I think we will be remote completely forever.
I think we'll see that with several companies, but there's also going to be we kind of called it in an article on the American Genius, commercial real estate hot potato, where companies are contracting. So, for example, Dell is headquartered in Austin, and they're now renting out their third floor to a database company and contracting their space a little bit. They've sold some of their land to the same company. So, I think you'll see as things kind of reopen. I think a lot of companies that had these huge vanity offices, and Dell isn't one of them, like they legitimately
Hmm.
have needed the space over the years, but you'll see, especially like a tech startup, for example, that really doesn't need an entire building,
Yeah.
had it for vanity purposes. I think you'll see half the building being leased out to another company. So we'll see a lot of marrying of those. But yeah, we're seeing people not being called back into the office, but being given that option, which is the forefront of being called back into the office. But I'll tell you, we I don't want to say we were pretty rough, but we published a list at the beginning of COVID of companies' responses to sending people home.
Yeah.
Because remember, we had already been prepping since December, so we took it very seriously. And there were companies that were extremely irresponsible with how they handled it by forcing people to stay in after it had, because they were saying, well, if they call it a global pandemic, then we can send people home. Otherwise, we're not going to. And then when they did, one company here in Austin that's actually an international company in the security space said, to their employees, well, just know that this is not a coronacation just because you're getting to go home. Are you kidding? People are dying, you jackass. What's your problem? Like,
Yeah.
coronation? What?
A lot of business owners don't understand how work from home works, and to be fair, a lot of them never had to deal with it before, right? I mean, I deal a lot with things like computer animation and visual effects in my career, and that industry was completely blown sideways by this because
Yeah.
the protection of intellectual property and the need for the artists to be close to the data source to avoid latency
Yeah.
because of the amount of data meant they weren't allowed to work from home, and all of a sudden they all had to. And there were a lot of very smart IT guys who spent about a month banging their heads against the wall figuring out the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Protocols definitely changed during the pandemic, especially when it comes to IP. I mean, for sure. And
yeah, but managers, I mean, I'm a manager. I've got a team of 9 guys underneath me. They're scattered all over the Western US. I trust them. And the only way you can be successful, especially in a working remotely environment, is you have to trust people, right? Because your standards for how you judge the work product has to be about what did they deliver and not about what are they doing every minute of the day.
yeah.
And there are managers who walk the floor just watching people do their work just to get
Yeah.
a sense of what they're doing, and and this will lead me to a different part of the discussion. It's also about a corporate culture and how you judge the flow of how the business is running. Right now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just the way some people are, and the way they work. Now, saying what the little voice in your brain is thinking out loud is probably not the best way to handle
Yeah.
that. So but that brings me to my next question. What do you think all of this does to ultimately to things like corporate culture and building cohesive teams, right? Because that's one of the biggest things I'm concerned about. Is I've been working now since the middle of March, and I have just had the privilege of meeting my boss for the first time in person last week,
Nice.
and I've never met face to face other than on tools like Zoom and Google Meets any of the people I work with, and I worry about what that means to being able to build a team camaraderie and culture. What do you think about that?
I have a couple of thoughts on it. I think we've been through a transition before when it comes to tech, and I mean, think about how managers struggled when the phone came to be. I don't know what my staff is saying. I can't hear what's on the other end. That must have been a difficult transition. There had to also be a trust builder when email was launched, and everybody had individual access to humans inside of an office, and managers had to trust that
Hmm.
that wasn't being abused, no weird stuff was being said. So I think there have been transitions before, and this is just one that didn't happen because of a cool, novel thing that occurred. this happened because of an emergency panic. So the reaction, I think, has been a little different, but we've adapted before. So I think we'll adapt to this as well. I mean, companies had to look at their technologies, how to
Yeah.
build these teams, and especially, there have been Zoom is one way that everybody's been transformed. But that's not the only one. There are tons of tools. Gosh, there's one I can't remember the name of it, but we used it briefly, but it had huge lag on our computers, so we stopped. But there was this one where we could all have a little tiny circle in the corner of our Chrome instance, and anytime any of us wanted to talk to anyone on the group, and there would be 7 of us at a time,
Yeah.
literally just pop in, and your video would become bigger, and they could hear your voice. It's kind of like a video walkie-talkie, and anybody that
Okay.
was around could like respond. But that was one way that we thought we would need the immediacy. Turns out we did not need the immediacy, and it slowed everything down. But you touched on something earlier, and that was trust. And I think that's going to be something that is going to it's already been tested during the pandemic. There's some people who have not and will not adapt to that. But my feeling on trusting teams remotely is if you can't trust your team remotely, even with IP, maybe you're not hiring properly. Maybe your hiring practices aren't very good. If you're hiring people that you don't think are trustworthy, then you're either underpaying and you're getting bottom of the barrel talent, or you have issues that you need to work through, or just whatever it is. But I think that that's what will inevitably come out of this is that the hiring practices will have to not necessarily just be on skill, but even on some of the like EQ on like, can we build a team of personalities that can trust each other and can be cohesive so that we can work on building the culture. Because if the hiring practices remain the same and don't adapt for any of the hybrid or remote workspace, then the cycle continues.
Yeah. Yeah. I found hiring to be a strange experience when it's exclusively online.
Yeah.
um, Simply because historically I've always read a lot from body language and just that being in a room with somebody, can you get them to get comfortable with you? Sometimes people on camera are performing all the time, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes they're being themselves. And it's very difficult to get a feel for that when you never actually make the physical connection with someone.
Yeah, but on the
Um,
flip side, I also think it opens up accessibility to some people who would otherwise be perhaps overly nervous during an interview
yeah,
situation because they just had to drive across town or something, and now they can be in their home. Or people that struggle to make eye contact, they can at least kind of make eye contact during a video interview. So I think although it's difficult on a hiring side, I do think that it opens it up to some talent that would otherwise be overlooked. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I think.
yeah, yeah, no, that's true. It's also literally changed the way we hire people, right? Because I can hire somebody. The only limitation to where I can hire from right now is where my company has a business entity in a state, right? So I can hire people in New York to be part of my team. I can hire people in Washington. I can hire people down here in California. I can hire people up in Quebec if I want to. And that's completely new. It's also changed the ultimate dynamic of how the team runs going forward, right? Because honest and truly, there's three of us that are based in the LA area when our offices are in the LA area, which means realistically, and this speaks to what corporate culture will be going forward in the future, right? I will have to fly at least two people in to have a team get together where we're all sitting in a room around each other, which I intend to do because I still think the human connection is important. And as long as everybody is vaccinated and we've started returning to something that resembles whatever the new normal is going to be, everybody should have a chance to shake hands and have a beer and sit around the table. And running a 24/7 team, we never do group meetings, right?
Well, but I mean, flying people in is cheaper than commercial real estate space. So,
Yes. I'm looking to see what happens in LA is we have a glut of commercial real estate space at the moment, right?
yep,
But we also have a homeless problem, a really serious homeless problem
yeah,
right now. I'm interested to see if somebody has the kind of imagination to figure out ways to encourage development to convert some of the commercial space into affordable housing space instead,
yeah.
and help solve that problem.
Austin has a similar houselessness problem wherein they've actually been buying up hotels for short term housing and things like that and gotten really creative. I know that regulations are a little bit more stringent in California, but I imagine if there's some serious thought being put into it here, there will there. But I wanted to go back to something you were talking about.
Sure.
That you have teams, you have limitations on where, depending on where the business licenses are held. But one of the conversations that employers are having right now that I think is going to become problematic long term is a question about, well, do we pay Bay Area salaries if somebody lives in Nebraska and they've moved?
Yeah.
So I think that conversation, I don't have the answer for it, but that conversation, Eh, well, I do have an answer for it. There are several companies that have been fully remote forever. Automatic is one of them, and they pay the same regardless of where you live. And for some, that's a huge pay upgrade. For others, it's a downgrade. And so you just kind of have to make that choice. There are existing models, but I think the fact that employers are having that conversation could end up leading to some culture problems, wherein if they decide to pay differently, you have two humans doing the exact same job making wildly different salaries, and I think
Yeah.
that could cause conflict because you assume that your employees don't know what each other makes. A lot of them do, and that
Yeah.
could if I'm making $100,000 doing something because I'm in Austin, and somebody that lives in the country here in Texas is making 40, and we're doing the same
Yeah.
job. Well, we're not friends anymore. It's not our
Yeah.
fault. So I
Yeah.
think that's going to be an interesting challenge that employers, and I think it's a fair question, right? Why would I
Yeah.
pay Bay Area salaries if somebody lives in Nebraska? They don't
Yeah,
need it.
no, I completely agree. I know in the case of my current business, I think what we've done is we've set an upper end median salary of what the role pays, no matter where you are,
Yeah,
and then we'll adjust based on where the person is. But again, we're not really hiring from the middle, the Midwest or someplace where
yeah,
the scales are dramatically different. So it's not a big deal. But I have a friend who works at DreamWorks Animation, who has moved to South Carolina during the pandemic because he's able to do it. And I imagine that there is a time coming when they're going to want to go back. I mean, it's an interesting problem, but if I decide I want to be an animator for a big studio and I happen to live in Iowa, I now have the opportunity to be an animator for a big studio. So it should mean less to me that the guy who has
yep.
the living expense of being in Los Angeles gets paid more than I do living in Iowa because I've made the choice to continue to maintain the lifestyle I have there as long as I'm getting paid what I feel is good compensation for the work I'm doing, right? And that's the mindset change, isn't it?
It is, but the challenge is that then companies are put in a situation where they have more serious conversation about cost of living increases based on where they are,
Right.
which they everybody supposedly does, but no one really does, if we're being frank. For example, I moved to a new home subdivision a year ago, and the average price, and we're almost an hour outside of Austin. Like we're very far north, and most people wouldn't even consider this Austin. It's like it's kind of on the kind. I can see cows from my front door. I'm not even kidding. But this new home subdivision, the house across the street was, which is a similar floor plan to ours, was bought for 350,000. It just sold for 675,000
Wow.
in 1 year. So where that leads me is if employers are having these conversations about, well, how do we pay based on where people live, then they're also going to have to be really frank about the cost of living and keep
Yeah.
track of it where everyone lives. So if there's a cost of living increase in Leander, Texas of 75% because housing has gone up, food has gone up, everything's skyrocketed, well, do I get that increase because that's where I live? Probably not. And also, I we own the business, so I'm definitely not going to get an increase in pay. But like,
There is that.
theory. So I do think that like the idea of salaries might be really different if we have this conversation in 10 years or 20 years. I don't know. We'll see.
It's interesting. I can tell you that during my days at Fandango, I had one guy who was based out of Texas who worked our night shift on our knock. And when it came to calculating his salary, I went and got the Robert Half salary survey
Yeah.
for technology, and bless them for the way they do it, was able to go back to HR and say, this is a base salary. This is the percentage ad for being in the Austin market. right? They start with a systems administrators make $80,000 a year. And then they say, but in New York, add 30% to that. And in Los Angeles, add 40% to that.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really helpful tool to be able to go back to the company and say, no, you can't really pay him dramatically less because he's in Texas and we're in LA. This is the cost of living in Texas.
Yeah.
And those kind of tools, I think, are really valuable
Yeah, and
for us all.
I think that will be helpful when people are hired. My worry is that that conversation won't continue and cost of living increases won't necessarily stay. They'll continue their X% increase per individual per
Yeah,
year, and so I don't know. We'll see. What it highlights though is that there's room for improvement in the accuracy of salaries
yeah,
just nationally in general.
yep, agreed. So the pandemic is getting better. Are things better in Texas than they were?
Yeah, things are definitely a lot better, and really the death count is way down, which thank goodness, and certainly the majority. Actually, I think they said something like 99% of deaths are people that are unvaccinated, and so
Yeah.
and without getting into the vaccination debate. So yeah, I think things are loosening up here. People are going maskless. It's pretty common. I actually live in a county
Hmm.
north of Austin. Austin's in Travis County. I live in Williamson County, and so about 2 weeks ago, things started really kind of going maskless. And I went to Lowe's and I was in the garden center and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna not wear a mask. And I felt like the naughtiest child on the planet, but it also felt really I was surprised. I didn't think I would feel liberated, but I felt definitely liberated because this has been such a taxation on our just daily lives. And
Yeah.
to like be able to do that one symbolic thing because the rates are such that we're allowed to, it did give me hope. It did feel kind of nice. It was a bigger moment than I anticipated it would be.
The first time I went maskless I felt like something was wrong. And then now, because of the state of things, there's still a mixed kind of message in some places. So I will always wear a mask still in the supermarket, just because of the volume of people passing in and out. But like for example, yesterday I was at the UPS store, and I walk in there wearing a mask because I don't know what the store policies are.
Yeah.
Nobody in the store was wearing a mask, and I asked the girl behind the counter, "So it's okay to take this off?" And she said, "As long as you're vaccinated." And I took my mask
Yeah.
off. So I think as long as we're polite about it, right? I think it's great to have that opening back up again.
I think so. And I've long thought that regardless of what the government says, if a private business is not comfortable with people being maskless, we should respect that. If a private business
Yeah,
is open to it, then fine. And I've long thought that it was up to them, up to the business owners anyways. So
yeah,
but yeah, it's definitely we're kind of starting to go more maskless here. Now, if you go into like further into Austin, there you'll still see a lot more, but kind of out towards the country where I am and the rates were already pretty low,
yeah.
that no one's wearing a mask anymore. So
Okay. How's the vaccine rate there, just in general? Are people taking to it, or are they avoiding it?
it's not as high as I would like, but we've had like in certain pockets like a weird anti-vax movement anyways, which I don't understand.
Yeah,
Especially I saw a joke. Somebody said something the other day of somebody I went to high school with was talking about anti-vax on their Facebook, which I actually think people should be able to choose. So like whatever, do your thing, fine. I definitely we got ours early because
yeah.
of immunocompromisation. But somebody commented on his page and said, dude, I watched you lick a beer off the floor in high school. I think you're gonna be fine. Like, get the vax. Like, like I've seen what you've put in your body. Like, you're gonna
Yeah,
be okay.
yeah, yeah. We've had a generally strange anti-vax experience here in LA, of all places, in wealthier communities too, where I mean we've had measles outbreaks in Los Angeles, which makes no sense to me at all, because I think anecdotally we've proven that that kind of works.
Yeah.
But anyway, people are a strange animal.
People are, but I think that it's if we respect each other, that one of the things that is still bothering me is the friction between people that feel very strongly one way or the other will
Yeah,
confront each other in public, and it's like just do you, let me do me, and just go away. I don't.
yeah. No, I'm with you, and it's across the board on everything, though, right? It's not just the moments. I think we were all getting anxious. I have theories about how social media has left us in this position where we all feel either envious or angry about other people, which is a half hour all by itself to talk
Yep.
about, right? Um, but I think that that's led to politics getting in the way of things that it shouldn't get in the way of, right? One of the hopes I've had coming out of this pandemic is that it becomes socially okay to wear a mask if you feel like you need to. So that when flu season comes along next winter and I'm sick and I still have to go to work because the culture is not letting me not, well, maybe I can work from home now.
Yeah.
Um, I can wear a mask when I go into the store and not get anybody else sick, right? And not have people look at me.
I think that's been a huge part of it, and I think that that's something that people won't freak out if they see anymore or anything like that. And I think as Americans, again, coming from an immunocompromised home, I haven't touched a door handle in 10
Yeah,
years. You know what I mean? Like I've been conscious. I, wash the hell out of my hands a million
yeah.
times a day for as long as I can remember. But America learned some hygiene, and I'm like super pumped about that. I think that
Yeah,
like people we learned how to wash our hands. So I think if anything good came out of it is that as a nation, we learned how to wash our freaking hands.
that's I'm with you. I'm with you on that. How do you feel about the next 6 months?
I feel pretty good about it because I think there's a sense of whatever we emerge as the new normal. We're looking at doing our offline events probably starting late August, starting and seeing. Of course, it's different. We don't know what to expect for attendance anymore, even after having a 14-year track record of offline events. We
Right.
could be way overbooked or underbooked, no idea. So that's going to be weird. But I think just in general, we've gone through a trauma together nationally, internationally, globally. We've
Hmm.
all gone through
Yeah.
this together. And it's one of the first historic events, definitely in our lifetime, where we've all experienced some change or something. Whereas most historical events happens in pockets or whatever. There aren't people that don't know what this is. There aren't people that
Right.
didn't have a change in their life. So I think as we emerge from this trauma, I think we'll have a lot to deal with and we'll have a lot of changes. But I think there's kind of almost a sense of togetherness in that we just went through something really major together. Yes, we're still going through it, but the worst brunt of the impact has passed. And so I feel hopeful for the next 6 months. I don't think we'll ever act like we once did. I think some things have permanently
Yeah.
changed, but I feel good and I feel hopeful. We're still not out of the woods. We're still definitely in a struggle spot, but I feel like that's coming. I feel it. Like I feel the tinglies of like,
Yeah.
okay, things are changing. I went to Lowe's without a mask. Let's do this.
Yeah. Yeah. We're close out here in California. We are almost to the numbers that would put us in the herd immunity space. My concern is we're going to have a really great summer and then we're going to have a outbreak in the fall. Around here, again, mostly focused around the people who are not getting vaccinated.
Yep.
And since I felt from the beginning a lot of the shutdown was about protecting the healthcare system, I think our numbers at least are to the point where we can get through without having to worry about shutting the world down again. But there are parts of the country that I'm worried will have issues for a while.
Yeah, this isn't something that ever is going to leave us. I think this is
Yeah,
like the flu. This is going to be part of something that we need to pay attention to forever. And
yeah,
I think in 20 years, it'll just be like the flu. It's
yeah,
just something we get vaccinated for and something that's with us. And some people will still die from it every year. I don't think it's going away. So, but I still feel hopeful that now that the major trauma is over, and we have an understanding of what we're dealing with. I think we can kind of collectively breathe a little bit and figure out what we're going to do next. So that's a good spot to be in.
yeah.
Much better than where we have been.
Yes, yeah. Definitely feels like it's getting back to real life again. So I agree with that.
Agreed.
What can I plug for you?
Everybody should visit theamericangenius.com. It's a great outlet for entrepreneurs and for people anywhere in any spot in their career. We have all sorts of content. It's always free to read.
Cool. We'll do that. Lonnie, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thanks for having me. I've had fun. We did it. Yay.